Spare a thought, I think, for the military families, those who endure the peripatetic and unpredictable life of service, who are finding themselves at the mercy of Britain's dual-track systems in healthcare and education. They are falling through the cracks of policy, populism and political posturing. And the Armed Forces Covenant was intended as a solemn vow, a promise that service would not bring disadvantage. But the House of Commons Defence Committee, chaired by Tandesi, recently revealed that the Covenant's implementation is patchy and inconsistent. Service families move frequently, it's part of the job, but each move often resets NHS waiting lists, making access to treatment a logistical lottery. This isn't respect, it's abandonment by bureaucracy. And the Local Government Association has rightly pointed out that while councils are committed to honouring the Covenant, they are not adequately funded to do so. So the noble pledge becomes less a noble pledge and more another underfunded initiative left to struggle at the local level. School admissions are another battleground. Some military children have been in 4 different schools within 2 years, thrown into the bottom sets because of mid-year entries and separated from peer groups as parents deploy. The solution many have turned to is boarding schools, funded in part by the Continuity of Educational Allowance, which allows over 4,000 children of service personnel to access private education. But this solution is now under threat as well, from Labour's proposed 20% VAT on private school fees. A political gesture dressed up as an egalitarian gesture risks collapsing a support mechanism that many military families depend on for stability. And the Independent Schools Council warns of closures and price hikes, and the Army Families Federation calls this a potential tipping point for retention. Let's be clear. For these families, private education is not about status, it's about survival. And Labour's proposal is ideologically framed as a way to make education fairer, yet it ignores those who use private education out of necessity, not privilege. It's an act of class theatricality, better suited to a 1970s student union than to a 21st century government. In other words, it's immature. James Cartledge MP has rightly argued that the tax could prompt experienced service personnel to leave the military altogether. The financial strain is stark. Families who already contribute 10% towards school fees could be hit with an additional £15,000 annually, and it's cheaper to keep these families in the system than to train new recruits, yet Labour seems intent on ignoring cost-effective compassion. And yet, ironically, it is private schools that have long benefited from their proximity to the military. Through the Combined Cadet Force, CCF, private schools effectively prep the officer class. A 2019 Sandhurst intake saw nearly 50% of cadets come from fee-paying schools, despite only 7% of UK children attending them. According to Elitist Britain by the Sutton Trust, the higher ranks of the army forces are overwhelmingly drawn from this private pool. CCF is framed as character building, but the darker undercurrents are real. The BBC's Panorama uncovered 363 allegations of abuse in CCF branches between 2012 and 2017, and yet the military continues to pay private schools to the tune of £81 million in 2021 to educate children of officers, a sum that far exceeds per capita state education funding. The state, in other words, subsidises the grooming of the officer elite while the rank and file struggle to educate their children. Labour strategists have, in recent years, pushed for the removal of military influence from education, particularly CCF detachments in state schools. Scotland already prohibits such forces in its state schools, although private institutions such as Fettes College remain exempt. This 2-tier system persists. Working-class children are recruited at careers fairs in northern towns. Privately educated pupils, meanwhile, are cultivated for command. Jeremy Corbyn famously refused CCF participation at his own private school, opting for gardening instead, a symbolic act that cuts to the heart of the discussion. I must say I'm very sympathetic to Jeremy Corbyn, and I did something similar. Participation may be voluntary, but presence is influence. The most egregious aspect of the VAT proposal is its lack of clarity. Despite repeated questions to the Treasury and ministers, there is still no confirmation that military families will be exempt. The silence is both deafening and damning. To burden service families financially and emotionally is not just poor policy, it's moral failure. So whether or not you like the idea of the military edging in private education, the fact is there is nowhere else to go. The fact is we either keep our military and make sure that their families are properly educated, or we abandon the military entirely and just assume that the only people who are in the military are monks. It's not realistic, is it, frankly? Either we have a system where we can guarantee an education for children who are moving around the country or moving around the world, or we find an exception for Rachel Reeves' appalling VAT action, and the other stuff which is making life in the private educational system almost impossible to predict. So it's one or the other, because this private hike in school fees is seriously impacting military families. And if you don't like the military impact in private education, there are alternatives. As I say, if you don't like the CCF, you can always do something else in most cases, even if that means you have to put your foot down a little and insist that you won't be firing a rifle. I remember having quite a stern conversation with a man who insisted it wasn't a gun, it was a rifle. So I will acknowledge the nomenclature. In a world growing more dangerous from Ukraine to the Middle East, we cannot afford to hemorrhage experienced personnel simply because of attacks aimed at symbolic equality. The result will not be egalitarianism, but an exodus, and it will leave us with even less of a military force than we've got at the moment. It's not the job of our armed forces to fund ideological experiments, nor should army families be caught in the crossfire of Britain's educational class war. We owe them continuity, clarity, and compassion, not penalties dressed up as policies. We need to remember, if we want to keep lions in the field, don't treat the cubs like pawns. We need an armed force, and we need to ensure that their children are properly educated. And the private school system has done that very successfully over the last 50 or 60 years, 70 years, and there isn't an alternative. If there's an alternative, by all means, play games. But Rachel Reeves has not thought this through in exactly the same way as she didn't seem to think through the tractor tax. It's one bit of lazy implementation after another.